offending people and holding unpopular views and opinions seems to be a byproduct of being schizoid, at least in my experience. I think that because my mind has developed outside of social norms and that my views of society are coming from an angle not from operating inside of it, but from living on the edge of it, that it gives me a perspective that is unpopular. I've never really had a strong desire to share my views and opinions. However, I do think that when I used to mask in social situations, a lot of it was to be aware of what I was sharing, how I was being perceived, and very much to blend in with other people. I'm able to exchange ideas with other people, if not emotions or deep personal content. And sometimes just thoughts and ideas, sharing that can be enough to cause another person a significant amount of pain. And since this has never been my intention, I learned with time that I need to stem the transmission of my thoughts and ideas, or to modify the way in which I share. So this comes back to masking again, and it's something that a lot of schizoids and other neurodivergent types need to engage in order to speak in a way or communicate in a way that is socially acceptable and isn't going to cause any unnecessary friction or understanding. I think that different types of people, whether they are schizoid or autistic, or they have both traits, like they're autistic with schizoid traits, and other neurodivergence, there's always going to be that outsiderness if there's no ability to blend into a group dynamic, and there's sometimes invisible blockages to social entry. I found that when I was masking, what I was actually doing was over-representing my level of emotionality. I have alexithymia, which means that I have difficulty reading my emotions, and my emotions tend to be muted, and therefore I have to translate kind of what I'm feeling, but I don't tend to really bother with that because I don't really find that there's any real use in doing that. However, in social situations, I do have the concept of what emotionality is, and I understand why people experience emotions, in what situations, and like what that's going to look like and how that's going to come out in the speech and the delivery. In the past, I was able to some degree, not on a full spectrum, but to some degree, I was able to mimic emotion and sort of, I wouldn't say mimic entirely, but more simulate emotion. And I could bounce off of emotional energies and reflect emotion back when it's like past my way. Like I can reflect it back to other people and keep in the mix of the emotional temperature of the room. However, if you were to take the people away from me, then there wouldn't really be that emotional flow through me. It's reflected from the external world back into the external world, and not necessarily being generated from an internal, personal, inner space. With masking, I would change my language, and so instead of speaking in more of a purely logical way, or instead of speaking in a way that suggested that I wasn't really feeling strong emotions, I would exaggerate my level of emotionality. And so what this would look like is things like saying like, oh, I really loved that film. And what I would actually think in my mind is that I found that film interesting because, and I'd have reasons. But by saying I love that film, it sounds like I've got strong emotions. And so that's one of the ways that I could mask the fact that I didn't. And also ramp up the level of personage that I actually have. So sometimes, like, I might say something like, oh, I really X too, or I really do that too, and I this, and adding in more I's than actually exist, because not lying, but something that doesn't matter to me personally, conveying it in a way like it mattered more than it did, like it had some sort of personal significance, when really it didn't really factor or register as having personal significance. And if there was any, it was minimal. But I'm not one to fabricate information like for the sake of it. But with masking, I think it's not about lying, it's more about joining in with other people and to sometimes adjust your levels in that way. I know that for some neurodivergent types that they have to learn like scripts and such things so that they can memorize sometimes, that they can use in social situations. I've never had the need to do that, but I could see how it could be useful. So that's basically, I think, how masking manifested for me. I think that with masking people, it's quite instinctive. Like, it's not something, to me, it's not something really that is preconceived. It's something more natural. Making adjustments to levels of things, making adjustments to the amount of emotionality that is felt or expressed, making in a sense of how it's being represented, and representing more of a self, etc., etc. Over the years, things have changed with me in terms of how much I mask, etc., because masking comes with an energetic cost, and really to be engaging in the process of masking, there needs to be ROI, and it can get to the point where it's no longer cost effective or necessary. It depends on situations. That is generally why I've been thinking about masking. Yeah.